Hello, everyone. This is the last video in the three-part series on Alberta's funding formula discussion for family day home educators. The first video is about the discussion paper. The second video is educator experiences and needs that might want to be considered. And in this video, I'm going to briefly overview the survey questions and some possible responses that you might want to offer as feedback to the government. So this is the first part of the survey. It's really easy. You just decide whether you think a service should be core, optional, or if it doesn't apply. Some of these things don't really apply to day homes, like the staffing ratio, that's pretty much set, but other things might matter to you. Is health and safety a core or optional service for offering quality childcare? So in my personal opinion, thinking about day homes, toys and equipment and arts and crafts are not optional. They're absolutely requirements. But something like safety pennies or matching shirts might be optional. It's pretty easy to count 6 children. So that might be something that we don't need, but I'll leave the decision up to you. So here's the next question. It's the same sort of thing. What is optional and what should be core? So should snacks and meals be provided by the parents? Should they be supplied? Should people be automatically providing transportation, or would that be considered going over and above? There's a lot of questions that have a comment box, and so that's what we're going to be focusing on in this video, is possibilities to think about that you might want to discuss or that you might want heard by the government. So after these slides, we'll be going over to a Word document and looking at some ideas. And there's other questions like this. So program funding, do the costs accurately describe your needs? These questions are easy. It's just a yes or no answer. Again, please raise your voice. It's amazing that the government is asking for this feedback. Participate in an engagement session. They're running out. I think there's only Edmonton left, and they have a waiting list for virtual engagement sessions as of yesterday. So the link to the survey can be found online. I've added it in the comments in video 2, and they want it completed by December 8th at the latest. You can find these recordings, the Word document, and other links to supportive materials on my website, dayhomedreams.ca, under the tab Research. I'll try and get those up as soon as possible, hopefully by the end of the day today, which is Tuesday, November 21st. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this, and I'm going to change my screen. That didn't work. Let's try again. Here we go. All right. I'm going to try and make this bigger, so hopefully you can see it. This is a working document. These are just suggestions. So again, it's what I believe is important based on my 10 years of experience running a day home, my 11 or 12 years of experience offering continuing education to educators, and my research, which has been going on since 2021, using a community engagement approach with day home agencies and leaders across the province. So they're just suggestions. I'm offering the Word document as a link on the website in 2 different versions. So one is a view-only version. You can copy it, paste it, delete what you don't want, add what you think is important. And I'm also going to include another version, which is editable for anybody. So on that version, if there's something that is not considered, please add it. I ask that you not delete anything in the editable version, but if it somehow gets messed up, the original version will always be there in a format that people can't change by accident. All right, so the document is going to have a link to the survey, links to these 3 videos. I've also created a couple of self-quizzes about day home agencies and licensing childcare systems. These can also be considered working documents. I've gotten a lot of feedback. Some is very positive and some not so much. So I am wondering about the possibility of creating an agency rating scale in the future, but for now, I hope it can just help you kind of define your thoughts and really focus on what is important. And last, there is the link to that session on Saturday, November 25th from 10 to noon. I'm going to try and go through these suggestions essentially as fast as possible because there's a lot. It's a really heavy topic. Okay, so the first question is about what should be included in the guidelines for optional services and why. Again, if this is something that resonates with you, leave it in, just copy and paste it. If you don't like it in your copy of the Word document, delete it. If you want something added, add it in. So I believe that books, art materials, and enriching environments are core, but things that go over and above should be considered optional, like lunches or transportation. I think it's really important to note that there is no parent choice if they can't afford an enhanced service. So I am worried about a two-tiered system where advantaged families receive higher quality care. And other families, like single parent families, recent immigrants, racialized or Indigenous populations, low-income families, like won't be able to access these services. And then the social inequalities will just widen for those families and children, which I'm not comfortable with. I wonder about full day closures, so if they should be optional or not. And I did really think it was important to note that many educators don't have the flexibility to meet variable needs of parents as long as they comply with regulations and the day home manual. Because right now, agencies do have ultimate control and they have the power to dictate requirements and limits that go above and beyond the childcare regulations and daycare standards. So I think it's important that educator flexibility and freedom needs to be clearly defined. And if accountability measures should be put in place so that educators can report to the government if their freedoms and choices are being unfairly constrained. So for example, right now, some agencies do not allow educators to ask parents to provide their own food. The agency says, no, we don't do that in this agency. So going forward, in order for it to be fair and in line with what the government believes is happening, educators have to make that choice themselves. Next, I believe that if an agency requires educators to purchase very specific books or materials, the entire cost of those materials has to be covered by government funding. So there was a recent Facebook post where a new educator shared a list of very specific books that needed to be purchased. A lot of them were expensive. Some of them were out of print or hard to find. I think there was a mandatory category and an optional category. So if certain things are going to be considered required to join an agency, it needs to be funded, and the educators need to be compensated for those items. There's a little bit of repetition in this. I kind of purposefully left it in. Again, you can take it out if you choose. So the choice to charge an additional fee to parents or to use government funding for enhanced services must be in the control of the educator. So agencies cannot make these decisions for all educators. So these are my ideas for how enhanced services can be monitored. So just asking parents to report on their enhanced services and fees, and mandating agencies or educators to report on their enhanced services and fees. When it comes to potential escalation of parent fees, I thought a lot about this, and the only answer I can come up with is just to put a cap on them and clearly communicate that cap with both programs and parents. I've highlighted sections where I'd love for people to put other ideas. I really acknowledge the lived experience of everyone working within the agencies, like directors and consultants and educators themselves. So I know that there's many people out here that have so many thoughts and views and experiences that I haven't had. So if we work together and can share our input, then we can grow a stronger system. So is there anything missing? What I see missing from the program funding description is that there's way too much variation in agency fees. Agency fees have to be made the same, and there has to be a cap. And I want to make this very clear. So this was a point raised in a recent communication. Right now, the agencies that have a cap are municipally funded. An agency cannot survive at all if educators are only paying $30 a year. Like, it doesn't make sense, right? So if there's a cap on agency fees, it's a maximum that would be paid, and the government would be funding the rest. So it's not all up to agencies. It's not an agency's fault if they're not having a cap, the funding isn't in place. So for it to be fair for agencies and fair for educators, there has to be a cap and it's got to be funded. Okay. I believe that the fee to be contracted with an agency should be fully compensated because that is going to have equity across the board. And I also think that startup and operating grants and subsidies need to be delineated to the educators and their agency. So what proportion stays with the agency and what goes on to the educator? There's too much variation, even in things like infant incentive grants, where some of it or all of it might be shared with the educator. It's not fair, it's not equitable, it's not just if you're living and working in, I don't know, Red Deer and getting 50% of your infant incentive, or you're working in Edmonton and you're getting 100%. It needs to be made crystal clear. We also, and they mentioned this in the document, need to receive equitable grants. Like the funding and financial support for administrative and overhead costs needs to be the same for day homes as well as center-based programs. And I'm so grateful that they put this in. Both the agency and the educator need to be adequately compensated. And program and administration funding and responsibilities need to be partitioned. And I said with excruciating detail, as much detail as possible. So what is the agency responsible for? What is the educator responsible for? Finally, program funding rates need to increase with inflation. So what factors should be considered? Again, I mentioned there's no parent choice if they can't afford it. I also think it's critically important for day home educators to be able to determine their own core hours with a limit of up to 9 or maybe 10 hours a day. When I looked at that 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. consideration of core hours, I just got a shiver down my spine thinking about what would happen if all educators were mandated to remain open for 11 hours a day. I don't think that that can be allowed to happen, and hopefully that won't be the case. What can be optional? So a lot of this is repeated from above, but again, I think books, art, materials, environments are core. Anything extra is optional. And is anything missing? So again, roles and responsibilities need to be defined. Accountability and transparency need to be in place. I just wanted to mention here, so, oh no, we'll go on. Apologies. Okay, accountability and transparency. So I'm not just talking here about funding. I'm talking about support that is offered and how educators are receiving that support. So is the support supportive? I also think that administrative burden can't be used as an excuse to differentiate numbers for day homes. So we need the spaces reported rather than the number of day homes. And this administrative burden must be financially compensated for to the agencies. So they have to get paid for that work. Again, purpose of funding needs to be clearly defined, agency fees regulated, cap on agency fees. I also really think that the fees themselves need to be delineated. I strongly believe, after giving it a lot of thought, that there needs to be one educator fee. So this is how much it is for the educator per month, and then parent fees. So if there's 4 children, like 4 parent fees. If there's 6 children, 6 parent fees. Because right now, in so many agencies, people that have 6 children in care are essentially subsidizing the agency and subsidizing other educators who have less children in care. So much so that they might be receiving like 60% or 30% less. And you can look at the other video to see the number of breakdowns. So that's a problem. Finally, day home educators need breaks. We need breaks. And some agencies are offering those, like I think it's 27%. So ensuring that the agency can support educators in taking a break. So a 15-minute break when the consultant comes during in-home visits, and an agency staff provided break about twice a year for 4 hours would be a really amazing thing, but government funding is needed to support agency ability to do this. So when we're looking at administrative funding, again, there's so much variation in time spent on these things. I would love to see guidance on how much time someone can expect to complete these bookkeeping tasks. And if an educator is like, whoa, I'm spending way more time than other people, there needs to be support and training to minimize the time. If a requirement changes, like the sudden decision to replace all playpens with cribs, funding needs to be in place for that cost. New day homes definitely need a startup grant to buy the required equipment, and long-term day homes need a replenishment grant so they can update older broken materials. Finally, many administrative activities are conducted by both the agency and the educator. So I don't think it's realistic to clearly delineate these, but overlap has to be taken into consideration. So the agency is likely advertising itself, right, for families, for day homes. The day home is also advertising to get families. So just as an example, if the educator recruits their own family, there should be a referral bonus given to the educator, in my opinion. So is anything missing? I think they did a pretty good job on residence funding. I just put that educators have so many roles, and if educators are fairly compensated for these activities, like janitor, cook, landscaper, everything extra that we do, we could choose to hire someone to do those, and the funds must match the funds given to center-based programs. Or the educator could do activities themselves, which would mean working longer hours, but that choice would be theirs. So what factors need to be considered? Again, just the overhead costs need to be fairly compensated. So the same financial support as center-based programs. What should be considered with maintenance costs? I think they did a pretty good job, but cost of repairs to the home that result from providing childcare, or things like wall washing and deep clean. So these yearly activities or seasonal activities that go beyond day-to-day cleaning should probably be considered. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, because there was a couple of these questions and I just thought, I don't have much to add, right? So is anything missing? We need to be compensated. Day homes need to be compensated for their responsibilities, which extend beyond their operating hours. Wage top-up needs to be expanded for day homes. And I apologize for an error in a previous video. As it turns out, the 8 hours was always part of the 181. But again, family day homes are working an average of 256 hours per month. So that needs to be taken into consideration. To provide quality care, we need time off, paid vacation written into contracts for educators and funded or somehow figured out. And we should be able to receive wage top-up during vacation. It's not enough to say you're self-employed, you don't get that. It's not enough. We should not lose money when taking a vacation. 43.6% of educators never take an annual vacation. 14% rarely take an annual vacation. This is a problem. Educators also need support in writing paid days off into their contracts if they're not considered within the framework that I think that they should be. And the wage grid needs to reflect education and experience. So for example, bonuses for working 5, 10, or 15 years. This would help retain our family day homes. Also, when we're looking at responsibilities in the wage grid, that's not really something Alberta's doing, but other provinces are. So they said, like, if you're responsible for administrative duties, bookkeeping, you move up on the wage grid. And I actually reached out to a couple of provinces for clarification about day homes. One didn't get back to me, and the other said, because day homes are self-employed, that's not taken into account. The responsibilities of educators, if it comes into play, needs to be taken into account. They're business managers, parent guides, educator, janitor, program planner, accountant, right? They're responsible for a lot more than just childcare. So when we look at the educator funding, so day home educators will be receiving most or all of their funds from the government. I believe they should be reclassed as public employees. We'll talk a bit more about that at the end. This is what the research shows is the highest benefit for educators themselves. I think we also need to open up the conversation on unions, which I realize it's like the elephant in the room. So many people are talking about it, but it's in like whispers, in shadowy corners. We need to air this out. We need to figure out if that would be a good decision and supportive or not. And if unions did come into play, agencies should not be able to discriminate or not contract with educators who choose to join a union. To be very honest, I have a lot to learn about unions. It's just something that keeps coming up again and again. We have to start this conversation. And parent fees. So it's the same thing, like delineating parent fees, educator fees, and agency fees Right now, it's not clear. I talked about it in a previous video. We need to know what exactly is going on with the funding and kind of where the money flows, where it should be flowing. So the main issues I see, I mentioned this, right? So if you're working a core hour, you may be forced to work 11-hour days, not okay. And also, can core hours be different for day homes? Like instead of saying 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. is the core hours for everyone in Alberta, could it be for family day homes, a maximum of 9 or 10 hours is core, and then it becomes extended hours of care? We don't get a break. There's no other staff coming on to take the night shift, and I think that needs to be considered. 22 is another question I thought a lot about. So what should be considered for determining the parent fee? And all I really came up with was parent ability to pay. So if a parent works night shifts, they should not have to pay more than they would if they worked a daytime shift. I've never offered extended hours or overnight hours of care. I do not have experience in that area. I really invite you to add your thoughts to the editable document that will be on the website. And reasonable profit. This is hard. It's hard to define. There was a recent post on Instagram about this, which was helpful. But essentially, I think reasonable profit would mean that they receive a monthly income that breaks down into an hourly wage consistent with wage grids for center-based educators. And remember, like you would get that income plus the residence and administrative funding. So whether you choose to still do those tasks yourself, like wall washing, I don't know, shoveling snow or home repairs, or to hire someone, that would be your choice. I think that we also need to know the average number of spaces in a day home. So it makes sense that if an educator cares for less children, they have less income, but it makes less sense if an agency caps the number of spaces. I don't doubt that there's a reason for capping spaces, which could be educator ability. It could be just the space. So if you have a tiny play space, maybe it makes sense to only have 4 children. But I think we need to have in the policy how an educator can increase their space, right? So if the day home was clear, because your play space is so small, you're going to have 4 children. If you wanted to have 6 children, here's the things that you could do. Also, just a reminder that in the current agency model, some educators, especially level 1s and 2s that are contracted with agencies charging the average rate or more, are losing money. They lose their wage top up, they make less money by becoming regulated. That is not a pathway that's going to see us recruit and retain regulated day homes in Alberta. Okay, again, I mentioned the kind of subsidy issue. So if you have 6 children, a lot of educators pay more in agency fees than those with 4 children. So you're pretty much subsidizing them. And if we capped agency fees and funded agencies so that they could do the good work that they do, it would remedy this situation. The reasonable profit for agencies also needs to be defined. If you have 6 children enrolled, according to the research that I just completed in August, the agency fees per month can be as high as $10,000 or that's a typo. I'll fix it. Agency fees per year can be as high as $10,000 to $13,000. So I just ask, is it reasonable that agencies are charging $1,000 per month or more to support one day home? And what the question actually should be is not what the agencies are charging, but what the educator is paying. How much is reasonable to fund an agency to provide their services? And should that come from the educator, the government, or what should be the breakdown? All right, so last point on this, 5% of day home educators don't know, weren't sure, or couldn't remember their agency fee. I think that speaks to a lack of clarity and transparency. So fees have to be clearly outlined and kept constant in order for the system to be equitable. 24, I left blank. I don't know. I don't know how it can create stability for educators if we're self-employed and we don't have the opportunity to direct license with the government. I want to say that it could create financial stability, but if you get shut down and there's no course of action, that's gone. If you only have 3 children and you can't find more children, there isn't stability, and supporting stability goes beyond just funding. So I don't want to be negative. I'm just not sure. And I see so many things in this policy document that could be beneficial, but a lot of other things that are actually scary. And we know that there's probably going to be some hiccups as it starts out. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how can it create stability for day home educators. So what are the most important things for government to consider? So I believe educators should have the same rights and freedoms regardless of their agency affiliation. Like they should be able to set their own hours, choose if they ask parents to pay for enhanced services, and write paid time off into their contracts. The research shows that some agencies do not allow this freedom. They may be set educator rates or hours. They might not allow educators to ask parents to provide food. They might not allow educators to write paid time off into their contracts. So I am concerned that if a government decides a given service is enhanced or optional, the agency could override that. So if you're with this agency, you don't get to say that you don't get to ask parents to provide food, because in our agency, that's considered core. If the government describes it as core, then it's core. If it's enhanced, it's enhanced. And the educator gets to decide whether they want to use government funding that they otherwise would be getting, or whether they want to ask parents to pay for it. I don't think it's okay for that to be an agency decision. So again, with the core hours that I'm concerned about, and this choice that just can't be decided by the agency. Also, I just want to make a note that some agencies are feeling attacked by the things that I'm sharing. That is not my purpose. I'm trying really hard to take a strength-based perspective and look to our leaders in the field, our highest quality day home agencies, share those examples and learn how we can all grow to offer the highest quality support that is possible. These things are possible because they're happening in some agencies, but they're not happening in others. And because we're not getting feedback from educators and they don't have a communication pathway to the government, we don't know about these things. It's a problem. So for example, some agencies are not supporting educators in applying for grants like professional development or paid release time. They might not get back to their educator. They might not share their licensing number, so the educator can't submit these things on their own. I think agencies need to be mandated to share their licensing number, and that educators need to be provided with the training required for them to fill in and submit their own forms, whether that's from the government or from the agency. I'm talking again about caps and grants and just how they have to be equal, whether you're center-based or day homes. Oh, this is a point that kind of touches my soul. So as my day home progressed, I ended up taking on more part-time children. It worked really well, and there's a lot of parents that need part-time care. It's come to my attention that for many reasons, some agencies are choosing not to allow educators to take on part-time children. Some families have started to complain about this as well. They're like, I only need childcare, 2 or 3 days a week, and I cannot find it anywhere. I do not believe agencies should be permitted to disallow part-time care. And I think that specifically has to be written into regulations and policies. Not all families are the same. They don't all need full-time care. The ones that need part-time care need to be able to find it. And I know that there's a lot of issues that go into this. It needs to get figured out. All right, what implementation challenges, what might we expect? So first, communication. We know that some agencies are not passing on critical information from the government. So we can close that loop by having information sent directly from the government to educators and posting things online so someone considering becoming regulated can see it as well. There's also language challenges. So this information needs to be written in clear language, particularly within the policy documents like the funding discussion paper. They have to be simple and clear so people can understand them. Finally, educator voices are often unheard. Not all agencies gather feedback, and they might not act on that feedback. There's also really big power dynamics between educators and agencies. We have to have a platform to amplify educator concerns, and we cannot assume that agencies are being transparent about educator needs because sometimes they directly conflict with agency needs. So I believe that agencies must gather and act on educator feedback in a transparent manner that has accountability built in. What types of support do educators require as we transition? So direct lines of communication between the government and the educators. Again, some agencies are not passing on information, which is critical. So agencies have to be mandated to pass it on, needs to be verified by the agency or educators need to be contacted directly. We also need a direct pathway to communicate for complaints to the licensing authorities if the agency is not meeting contractual requirements. Right now, there's a lot of people checking on educators, maybe less people checking on agencies, and we're often not checking on childcare systems themselves. I know that these are controversial things to say. We must start this conversation and figure out how we can do better. Okay, so do the principles make sense? So I talk more about accountability here and things like IDPs. I think agencies having to complete annual IDPs like educators do is a wonderful idea. And just being monitored and held accountable, not just for funding, but for things like providing networking opportunities, offering supportive professional development, and making sure that those things are meeting educator needs. So you can be offering all of these things and think you're doing a great job. That if you're not checking with the educators, you have no idea if you're meeting their needs or not. They can't say, I'm going to leave the agency and just become licensed with the government, because it's not an option. So forgive me when I say, just because you run an agency doesn't mean you are doing an amazing job if you're not checking in with your educators on how it's going and changing and growing over time to further support their needs within your abilities. Okay, so the last question is, do you have other ideas or funding you would like to share? So I just put some prompts, right? My main concerns are, what's most important to me is, again, the things in this document are my opinion. They are based in life experience and a lot of research. However, they might not be your opinion. That's okay. We can think differently. It takes many different minds looking at complex problems like supporting quality family childcare. So again, in your copy of the Word document, delete it if you don't agree. Add it if it's not there. I strongly recommend, if you have a point to consider, that you put it in the view or edit document by, I'm going to say Friday night or like Saturday morning by 8 a.m. at the latest, so that that can be part of our discussion and that we can hear more people's thoughts, especially if they can't attend that live session. Okay, so again, licensing information needs to be clear. I think we need to look at not using an agency model. I don't know what is best. I just know that there's huge power dynamics and it's a problem. It's a problem even saying you don't hold the license, the agency holds the license. So I've heard this said in many ways in a very condescending, disrespectful tone that just speaks to these power dynamics and the concerns. Finally, and this is important to note, Canadian research shows that the party offering support should not be the same as the party monitoring for quality. It's unequal power. Educators might not share their problems or concerns because it might put their license or regulated status at risk. So I wonder actually about a system where there was one organization or network of support for educators and another network of organizations like agencies that offered monitoring. Support and monitoring should be separated. So we are going to conclude with a brief discussion about unions. Oh, and I put stay-home unions. There's another typo here that I will be fixing. So what is a union? It's a legally protected organization of workers united to share a collective voice, created, funded, and controlled by the workers themselves, and they directly negotiate with employers and the government for labor contracts. Collective bargaining groups can improve jobs and working conditions, so health and safety, benefits, training, and wages. Without a union, right now, we don't have a union in almost everywhere across Canada because we're considered self-employed. That leaves us unprotected by labor laws and without a cohesive voice to advocate for change. It decreases benefits and wages, makes it unclear who is responsible for working conditions, like being able to take a break, being able to take time off. Whose responsibility is that? Runs the risk of violating basic labor standards and isolates workers from one another. So I think agencies are wonderful in that they connect their educators. But if you're only working with one agency, it can almost become like an echo bubble. And if you're working with an amazing agency, that's wonderful. But if you're working with an agency that offers things differently, that's problematic if you think this is just the way things are and you don't have a way to connect with other people and learn what really high quality day homes can look like, day home agencies as well. Okay, so with a union, in 2021 in Quebec, 10,000 educators received a 30% increase in subsidy. And in the United States, educators in different regions have advocated for and received benefits with CPR, PPE, cleaning, health and dental benefits, paid PD days, paid time off, a $40 million training fund, increased wages by 64%. These are huge things, but it's really important to consider that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to what individuals need or want in terms of support. And that's why I offer these as suggestions. I'm telling you what I think based on what I know. Please add your voice. So this is a conversation that was held just yesterday with an educator that reached out to me. I'm sharing it with her permission. So she just has a question about unionizing. She's wondering how that would impact our status because a large part of the appeal is being considered self-employed and having those tax freedoms. She says the majority of educators she knows pays little to no income when their accountants manage their write-offs, so they get to keep more money. And when we talk about advocating for standing as public employees, there is fear of losing that financial flexibility and end up paying 30 to 36% for taxes. So can you give insight into this? So from her perspective, which I respect and value, her reaction is just not to support unionizing or advocating for a standing that labels us as employees. My response was that I'm just learning, right? I honestly don't consider myself an expert. I am a researcher, but it really means knowing more and more about what you don't know. So I do think tax write-offs are amazing, but there's so many drawbacks to not being considered self-employed, right? And I've got another typo here that I will fix, apologies. So lots of benefits to be an employee. I can't decide what's right, and that's why these are recommendations. But what if we flipped this? What if we received 30 to 60% more funding and got all of the benefits of being an employee? So labor law protection, paid time off, vacations, health benefits. I think that the total gain would be much more than the net loss from paying income tax. There's other things like paid maternity leave, like WCV. And also, finally, joining a union is a choice. Unions aren't forced on people. It would never be something that you would have to do. So I'd love to continue this conversation. I'm hoping to set up a session on educator rights, similar to the one in the 2023 Bursting into Spring conference, to deepen this conversation. So again, I'd love to hear your thoughts on all these things. I see you all working so hard. It can be really hard to shed light on things that we've been doing for a long time. Change is hard. Having these discussions is really important, and I hope that we can lean on each other and grow stronger together in order to provide the highest quality care for children using day homes across Alberta. I'm ending this with some readings on family day homes. A couple of them are short news articles, a couple of them are longer research papers, but you can check those out if you want to learn more. Thank you for watching. I'm going to fix those typos, get this up on the website, and I really hope to see you on Saturday.